So for the most part, that's what's here. But we want to help lay some context for unity and what the path forward can look like. And in order to do this, we really have to look at the world, specifically the United States, although this same, you could even call it a metaphor, applies more widely as well. There are two sides of this discussion, and quite a few more variants of those two sides. Very different messages all across the board, but two main sides. One side's incredibly excited that Joe Biden is now president, and they feel as though they've ousted a dictatorial bigot. The other side is extremely disappointed that Joe Biden never stepped foot in the White House, that those videos ever came out, that any executive orders were ever placed, that he was ever inaugurated in the first place. They feel as though something went wrong. Or if something hasn't gone wrong yet, that something must still be in play, and there's no way that this country could ever be a communist or socialist country, that they will fight, be digital warriors to the end. And every step of the way will illuminate more corruption. Every step of the way will continue to do research. Every step of the way will continue to dig down into the possible paths forward, keeping a pulse on what's here, keeping a pulse on what's possible, keeping a pulse on the ideal. Now, these two various pockets you could look at, and some people do, as those who have been manipulated by a massive psyop and those who have an understanding of the world. You could. But we want to help lay this context slightly differently. And in order to begin to move into a place where you're able to coexist with other people who have very different opinions and beliefs about what's here and what should happen over the next year, 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, we have to be able to look at progress as a civilization. So there are certain things that are inevitably happening. One, for example, is a transition from carbon-based fuels and energy to more sustainable means. So transitioning from oil and natural gas to things like solar panels, wind, and really battery-powered machinery, cars, to where your day-to-day life is powered by something that can continue to exist for hundreds, thousands of years. Now, this is essentially inevitable. There are some terrible, catastrophic ends that, sure, are possible. But this transition is inevitable. So what's here between the left and the right is not, should we be completely unsustainable and terrible people, or should we really take the science seriously, which is how it's put forth sometimes. What's more so here is, what is the best way to facilitate that transition that's already happening? Is it worth expediting it faster than the general population is going to transition already? Is that necessary? And if it is necessary, what's the best way to facilitate that happening? Is it through education, or is there some sort of top-down regulation that forces people or highly incentivizes people? $10 a gallon of gasoline highly incentivizes people to begin to make that switch, to where financially, even now before the technology is there to where people would naturally transition anyway, before that technology is completely there, widespread education, all the understanding laid, to where a massive, almost by force, transition would happen through incentives. Is that necessary? Is that ideal? That's more so the conversation that's happening here. And if we look at this as a metaphor for politics, that's really the same thing that's happening with social movements. It's the same thing that's happening with gender pronouns. It's the same thing that's happening across the board with issues around race, gender, homosexuality. There's a high level of tolerance for people to be themselves, express themselves, and to not be discriminated for it. There's a high degree of a standard of equality in this country in particular, in the United States of America. And there's certain elements of these social movements that are inevitable. How they pan out in the long term isn't really the question. It's more so these pockets highly prioritize these things, highly prioritize that certain type of expression, and they want to make sure that they have the freedom to be able to explore in that way. That exploration is inevitable. So the question isn't how do we make sure that this happens, it's do we need to speed this up? How quickly can we speed this up? And is there a way to expedite that natural transition so it can happen sooner? And if there is a way, should it happen through top-down regulation? Should that type of discrimination, which is most of the time misunderstanding for something that's so relatively new in the collective, should that misunderstanding then be labeled as discrimination and then be enforced by the rule of law, essentially by force? These are the considerations that are being made. And when you look across the wide variety of political agendas, often what's happening is there are different value sets that are both incredibly important to the country. Ideally, those things are integrated in a way that's comprehensive, in a way that's ideal, in a way that genuinely works and is sustainable long term. The movements or the ideas that are bad, that don't play out well, play out to the end that they will, and are either rescinded, pulled back, there's a realization that they don't work, or they go to their bitter end. And the movements or ideas that are good continue to move forward and become the norm. They simply become tradition. Now, one of the challenges currently is this divide is really built on a lack of understanding or misunderstanding of what is already in tradition. How much of tradition needs to be updated and how much is quite literally the foundation of everything that's happening now. What are the things that if you destabilize that, what are the core pillars of your civilization that if you overly destabilize it, then things will go terribly wrong and no one will get their way? Is it the First Amendment? Is it the ability to speak freely and share ideas? Is it the Second Amendment? Is it really important for citizens to be armed as a check and balance on then governmental and military power? What is at the core of your civilization that if it's overly destabilized would destabilize everything? This is one of the considerations that's happening now. So while you can think of this as differing values, social values versus freedom, you can also look at this as progress versus conserving the foundation. Now, if you recognize that progress is inevitable, and you recognize that conserving the stability of civilization is vital for any progress to happen, then you begin to recognize that there's two sides of a very, very important, vital equation to progress. Those who want progress and have that valued above even preserving the very structure of civilization, if they had full reign, would completely destabilize civilization. Nothing good would happen. If those who wish to conserve tradition were to overly have the power to do so, then there'd be very little progress made in the general trajectory that your civilization is wanting to go. Now, despite there being a left and right in the United States, these particular camps blend together. There are people who want to conserve what works and what's necessary to offer stability, and there's those who also at the same time wish to have that progress. There's a blend of the two within every individual. But when you zoom out to this larger picture, you begin to see that both elements are incredibly important. And the people that are fighting or pushing for those camps, who are outwardly in their external identity most focused on one or the other, are going to look at each other and see massive disagreement. Oh, but no, you see, I want to preserve the freedoms that we have. And the other camp says, yes, but you're preserving something that's imperfect. We want to create progress into something new and more ideal. Often, neither of these individuals recognizes the need for both to happen simultaneously. The fat around the edges gets trimmed off within tradition because some things aren't ideal or some things are no longer as relevant. Meanwhile, progress is made to refill those pieces. And what's left over in tradition is incredibly important to be able to hold together the stability of the civilization. So we want to zoom out and look at it from this vantage point, because this perspective can be helpful to, one, not hate everyone on the other side of things, and to recognize that it's a team effort. Truly, progress in your civilization is a team effort. And really, you're all on the same team. Everyone wants things to go well. The ideas of how to get there and which things need to be prioritized more fully is different across the board, but everyone wants things to go well. So unity is really far less about everyone having a homogenized viewpoint. Here's exactly what we need to do, and everyone believes that, and that's how we have unity. It's far less of everyone being the same and far more of everyone playing their roles fully, deeply engaged with the world, willing to push back when something's incredibly important, when they know something is true and vital, while also recognizing that what others are doing is equally as important, because no one person has the key or the answer to everything that's coming. So we want to lay this context again, because it helps to not hate your fellow man, fellow woman. But we also want to lay this context to help elongate the amount of time in your own mind, in your own context, in your own understanding of the world that things need to happen in. When you recognize there's something larger at play, it's not about either camp winning. It's truly not. There needs to, at some point, be a synthesis of ideas. There needs to, at some point, be agreement and beta testing of certain ideas. Even the structure that you have with various states being able to operate fairly independently offers some of that. You're able to see what works and what doesn't at the extremes of the hubs of the political left and right. But what's happening right now, why so many are feeling so divided, is because things got intense. And when things get intense, there's a level of emotionality that starts to hook into wanting things to happen a certain way and happen in a certain time frame, and that becomes the expectation. So that progress that many individuals are fighting for right now is going to take significantly longer than they want it to, and that's going to mean a significant amount of disappointment and often hatred and anger toward the other side that's slowing it down every step of the way. and calling out the ideas that simply won't work or overly destabilize reality is also going to take longer than those more focused on freedom and conserving the core pillars of your society would like to admit. So what's happening is people have an idea of what the world needs to be now, and it's becoming their emotional baseline. They begin to expect that that is what the world needs to be. They begin to normalize to those ideas and see them as not just an ideal future, but an ideal present and a necessary present. And when the future ideals become a necessary present emotionally, you have a gap between reality and your perceived necessary present. That gap is the thing that's trying to be filled. People are trying to feel better by changing the reality as quickly as possible to match reality to the expectations that they've built internally without doing the work, or really without letting things play out in the amount of time that it actually takes for things to play out. When we speak about business, we speak about this in the exact same way. Things are going to move slower in your business, in your life. You are going to become yourself slower than you want to, even though the intensity is often very high and you're leaning into your evolutionary edge constantly. You're doing what's here. You're following the pings, following your intuition. Things are going to take longer than you want them to, and you're not going to have a sudden relief of an immediate hit of utopia because things continue to roll in and you continue to normalize to them. So what's happening and why so many people are feeling depressed about the state of the world is because they're beginning to recognize that their expectations of the world aren't coming true in the way that they wanted them to come true. They're recognizing that they were making decisions and allowing their perception to be altered in a way that was incredibly manic. It was happening too quickly. They were learning so much all at once, wanting things to move, and it didn't, and it won't. When you recognize this, you can sit back in your seat of peace, where you were most connected to who you truly are, where you're most aligned with who you truly are, where you're most capable of expressing who you truly are. And you come back into your role and do what's here for you. You share your unique light with the world that then moves the world forward in the way that it's meant to. Toward that ideal, but not achieving that ideal overnight. If either side wins, everyone loses. Because the only way for either side to win totally, squashing the other, is through some sort of brute force. At the very least, an informational dictatorship, propaganda, disinformation, suppression, censorship, and at the most, a physical dictatorship with brute force in a way that most people don't want to imagine could ever happen here. Though it has, and though it can. What's here is to allow yourself to settle back into a seat of peace and recognize that the left and the right, the mortal enemies, are moving in the same direction. Everyone's in the same civilization. Civilization is moving forward. Every new generation, new soul embodiments come and bring their own unique essences to the world. It shifts things. The cutting edge, the light delivery mechanism of the planet, those most deeply connected to their soul's essence and radiating it out most fully, most solid in who they truly are, inform culture. Culture then informs tradition. Tradition changes. Tradition's changing all the time. What your civilization is changing all the time. So allow it to change. And allow yourself to stay steady within that change, recognizing that it's all a part of something much larger. Much larger in scale, not just what's happening on Earth, but what's happening throughout all of divinity, throughout the entire etheric network of everything and every being everywhere. And also bigger in terms of time, much longer. Your civilization is becoming everything that it is set out to become, that it is intending to become. But it's happening more on a scale of 300 to 500 years than 3 to 5 years. And though that's a hard pill to swallow that you won't see in full actualization and manifestation, the utopia, at least what feels like utopia to you before you get there and realize there's further edges always. Though you won't fully see it, and that hurts, you're playing your role and things will continue to get better and better and closer to those ideal realities every day. What it requires is not any side of any debate winning, but a recognition that what's really happening here, ideally, the trajectory that your planet's going is a massive awakening into the individual understanding of your own soul. Recognizing that everyone is connected deeply to divinity, deeply to who they truly are inside, deeply to the purest representation of their values as the soul. And they're beginning to change what was here previously, the thing they came into, starting with their own body and biology and all of the programming that comes with that. And then through their own modeling of their soul's essence and radiance and values and truths out into the world. And through the physical creation and representations of those unique soul essences coming out. That's what's really happening here. That's the long play. And things are certainly moving in that direction. So in the meantime, which is really for the rest of your life, settle back, remember who you are, and focus on who you are. Keep a pulse on what's happening. Speak into the things that need to be spoken into. Prepare in the way that needs to be prepared for. But ultimately, trust yourself. You are going to see plenty of political games playing out. You're going to learn a lot about the way those political games are played. The more you learn, the more you're able to orient yourself to the world, not by bending to it, but by knowing exactly what you're here to speak into and exactly what you're here to do. The moment you recognize your life's mission and purpose in the way that most people wish to find it at the earliest stages of their life and their business, the way you truly find your purpose is by knowing exactly who you are and by seeing the world for exactly what it is. Because the moment you know who you are and what the world truly is, immediately you see your role in it. Immediately you see the things, your own unique aptitudes, your own essence, your own gifts, your own truth, in contrast with what the world is, and you see the unideal aspects of the world, and you recognize why your recent ancestors quite literally prayed for your unique essence. Out of all of the variations of soul, out of all of the slight variations of the many, many souls within divinity, why this planet, this collective prayed for you. But in the meantime, settle back. Continue to trust yourself. Continue to build a differentiation between your bodily programming and your truest soul essence. Continue to stay engaged with the world, understand what's out there. And if you haven't already, though most individuals who orbit into this particular body of work explore spirituality first before truly understanding the world, if you haven't already, also continue to explore spirituality, continue to explore what else is out there too, because it's certainly not just this physical reality. The greatest way to help the planet is to know where you are and who you are. So keep going. And remember that that's your goal. That is your sole purpose on this planet, both SOUL and SOLE, is to land your soul's essence into your body first, and then to radiate that expression, embodied expression, out into the world. That is what the earth ordered. And that is what you are here to deliver through your own free will, through your own choice in every moment. That is what the earth beckoned you here for. And that is what you answered that call for, to do. To be here as yourself. So keep going. And remember, the game here is much, much larger than it seems. So, for those of you within the club who are still here, we wish to also lay a bit of context around why your understanding of this is so important, why it's coming through specifically here.